Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the afternoon session. I expect people will be drifting in, but I think in the interest of time, we will start our session today. And this is session 2, entitled Climate Action, What a Cooler Planet Means for People and Environment, focusing on Goal 13 of the SDGs. But I think throughout the morning, you have heard a lot of very interesting interventions on climate change already. So I think what you're going to hear now will just reinforce what we have already learned earlier today. So I'm Lavanya Rama Iyer from WWF Malaysia, and WWF is also a part of the CSO-SDG Alliance, and I'm a member of the APPGM-SDG that you heard about earlier. And it is my extreme honor and pleasure to moderate this session and I'd like to thank the organizers, KSI, Tan Sri, Michael, for kindly inviting WWF Malaysia. Ladies and gentlemen, we have been through an unprecedented 1 year caused by a tiny virus, and we continue to grapple with the havoc wreaked by it. You will recall, though, that just before COVID-19 became an all-consuming global phenomena, we were getting alarming accounts of various things happening around the world. Heat waves and record high monthly temperatures in Europe and Alaska, raging forest fires in Australia, tropical storms, cyclones, typhoons, hurricanes in Thailand, Sri Lanka, Japan, Bangladesh, you name it, India, across Africa and the Bahamas, flooding in Iran, Spain, and the US. And here in Malaysia, we have been experiencing extreme weather patterns too. Very dry spells punctuated by intensifying storms and rainfall, with their ensuing consequences for lives, livelihoods of the rakyat, and also disruptions to business operations. Like the tiny virus, the climate crisis does not discriminate. We heard that the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is at a record high of 414 parts per million, with no sign of the much needed reversal of that upward trend in sight. At the same time, last year, the World Economic Forum reiterated climate change as a top risk to the global economy in its annual Global Risks Report. Alongside that, biodiversity loss and the loss and destruction of nature was also identified. And we saw that came to play with COVID-19, a zoonotic disease that has resulted in a devastating pandemic due to man's fractured relationship with nature. No leader, no country, no business, no person has been spared the impact. So whilst this paints a grim picture of what may yet come with the much larger looming twin climate and nature loss crisis, something that His Excellency very articulately talked about a little earlier before lunch, we have seen some action in the right direction. Several countries have announced their targets to become low carbon or net zero emission economies by mid-century, including key trading partners like China and Europe. And here at home, we have seen corporate entities making commitments to zero out carbon emissions from their operations. And the government launched a very progressive opportunity for Malaysia to protect our precious forest cover and reduce our overall carbon emissions while protecting our natural heritage by enabling corporate entities to participate effectively in financing this effort through the RED Plus framework, RED Plus financing framework. And at the same time, we have seen some very exciting trends also in the financial sector to account for climate risks, like the formation of the JC3 or the Joint Committee on Climate Change, spearheaded by Bank Negara Malaysia and the Securities Commission Malaysia. While many rightly feel that we need to move at a much faster pace to address our environmental crisis, and we heard that also in Stefan's very comprehensive address in the morning, let us also take stock of where we are and what we need to do to build upon and accelerate these advances. I am really delighted to introduce you to the stellar panel lined up for this session who will help us with this. We have today, first, Ms. Arina Koch, who is the Director of Climate Change and Sustainability Services with Ernst & Young. And Arina, maybe you can talk to us a little bit about global investors and driving demands regarding climate risks disclosure and how our Bursa listed companies are responding to this, and anything else you'd like to touch on. Before we start, each of the panelists will be given 8 minutes for their initial interventions. And after that, we will have a conversation around what has been discussed. Okay, Arina, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Lavanya, and good afternoon to everyone. Thank you, Tan Sri Michael and KSI for having invited us here. Now, touching on the questions of what global investors are actually looking now, it goes beyond climate change. As we have seen in the recent years, the traction of climate risks has actually, been sort of impacting all the society, civil society, businesses, and governments are ramping up their policies up until, the anticipated COP26 this year. Now, to break it down to actually what are they looking for, I wanted to share, in the last few years, EY has actually commissioned a study on what we call the Climate Barometer from the global aspects, where we evaluated more than 1,000 companies on their climate risk disclosures. What does it really mean, and what investors are essentially looking for? So we've also done a local chapter for Malaysia, issued December last year for the top 100 companies. And this 100 companies represents 80% of our Bursa market cap, 1.64 trillion. Now, looking at this research, what we found is we evaluated companies on their disclosures on their governance, their strategy, the risk management, matrix, and target. And what we found is, a significant portion, of what these businesses are looking at is over 1/3 or 34% of the PLCs disclose climate-related risks, but this quality are just scoring at about 12%. On top of that, 3/5 of this 100 companies have sort of committed on climate action, SDGs 13, which sort of recommends corporates to set up on their disclosures on climate-related risk governance strategy and risk management. Now, what I wanted to deep dive a bit is, looking at the landscape, it's quite clear that, this top 100 listed companies, they have rolled out matrix and targets, but what's clearly missing was actually on the strategy and how they are actually driving this in the governance aspects. So in terms of the, what we have seen practically is in an organization, a lot of the companies, they have put in place a certain environmental aspects to measure emissions, to measure the energy, and they've sort of set some sort of baselines and targets on how they expect the business as usual will look like in terms of emissions. But what we clearly see lacking are actually what the scenario looks like for them. If they were to consider the transition to low carbon economy, the question is then how resilient are their businesses in anticipation of what the cooler earth or the low carbon economy looks like? To put it into context, for example, if you look at the utility companies and the oil and gas companies, right? The increasing trends are really essentially on the discussions of stranded assets. If policies and countries are actually shifting away from fossil fuel, now what other alternatives could these large industry players do? How are they going to sustain their business or shape or change some of their models if some of their assets are going to be stranded by 2050, or if some of their assets are not going to be financed or refinanced even before they hit 2050? Global research has already shown that, in certain jurisdictions, building renewable energy plants are cheaper right now than building coal plants. And the acceleration of the reduction of cost of renewable energy is going to, steep up even further And it will come to a point of time where building renewable energies is going to be cheaper than repowering the existing coal plants. And when that happens, what would the asset owners do? And are the financial systems ready to manage that kind of transition? So this is one of the key aspects that is, being discussed not just at the asset manager level, but also at investor level. The idea is because of disruption from reduction of costs, technology, everyone is racing to zero. We have China who is trying to be the leader in trying to be the manufacturer. And India is also, Kerala is also driving the force as well. So the question is then, where do the rest of the economies place or stand when the tipping points comes in? When I talk about the tipping points, is essentially when there are interventions from the technologies such as battery storage, EVs. How would that disrupt the whole value chain of the ecosystem? Now, the other finding that we found on the barometer was also, it's not all gloom and doom. We have seen leading companies in Arbusa, Malaysia, who has actually started the shift towards leading the pack. Now, what we've seen is in the consumer products and services, there has been certain organizations have been innovating products. Take, for example, if we look at the PetChem has actually specified that they will conduct scenario analysis to climate change, and they would intend to initiate an internal carbon pricing. So we know that Malaysia doesn't have a carbon tax in place at this point and is studying it, but it doesn't stop the organization to kickstart their internal carbon pricing, because to a certain extent, when you have operation globally, you need to be aware. If your operations goes beyond to Singapore, who's already implemented carbon tax in 2019, now what does that mean to you as an organization? We've also seen the plantation sector actually scoring the highest, because essentially in Malaysia, you see that the industry is reflected by its vulnerability, the impact to climate change and their crops. And there has been increasing impact to, from the extreme weather event, forest fire, and deforestation and floods. So on the sector perspective, plantation has actually, matured the most in terms of their disclosures, but there are more to come. In terms of the, I'll just cover just one, but you can have a look at the report. I would encourage you. In terms of the healthcare, we also seen one of the healthcare companies even setting target to reduce their emissions intensity by 23% by financial year 2024 at a baseline of 2019. So even a financial healthcare player is trying to set an emission target. Now, what that means is, we are not starting from zero. Quite a number of our large organizations have started the journey. I would just want to bring to the next part, where I wanted to share EY itself as a global firm. We are one of the first, we are actually the first big four to actually came out and say that, we're going to commit on, we commit on net zero. We already achieved net zero by 2020 last year, and we came up with a further commitment that we're going to aim for carbon negative by 2021 to eventual carbon net zero by 2025. So understanding that there will always be a ramp up of business, but we intend to take this commitment further towards the horizon moving forward. And part of this is really to drive partnership and work with the rest of the players. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Arina, and congratulations to EY on your own journey. Maybe later we can understand what motivated EY as well towards this. Next, let me call now upon Arshad Mohamed Ismail, Arshad, who is the President and Group CEO of Bank Pembangunan Malaysia. And Arshad, maybe you can share with us Bank Pembangunan's journey as a bank, what motivated you to, and what the bank itself is doing, and how you're supporting sustainability in the country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lavanya, and good afternoon. And thank you to KSI for inviting me. Before I get into that particular question, I would like to talk about something we are celebrating this week, International Women's Day. And I did ask Lavanya if I could speak about this before I jump into the question. I was at the back of the hall before lunch reading some tweets, as we all tend to do when we are at conferences. And I came across one particular tweet that made reference to an interview given by Justice Nalini Patnaden. And for those of you who might not know, Justice Nalini is a judge of the Federal Court of Malaysia. And I have to pick up my phone for this because it's from a tweet. She was asked this particular question: why do you think celebrating International Women's Day is important? And I have to mention that these are not my words. These are the words of a judge of the Federal Court, someone who is far more eloquent than I can ever hope to be. It is important to celebrate International Women's Day because it remains a fact that historically women have been and continue to be systematically marginalized by a system that is premised on the notion of male supremacy. The premise presupposes that the male gender is superior physically and mentally, and thereby actively excludes and suppresses women from leading roles in politics, economics, and the workplace in general. Although matters have progressed positively for women over the course of the last few decades, it remains a fact that women still experience the negative effects of systemic discrimination. And she goes on. So that's why it's important to celebrate International Women's Day. I'll now get to the question. I am with Bank Pembangunan Malaysia Berhad, the Development Bank of Malaysia. And for those of you who might not be familiar with our story, we were established in 1974. And in the first 20 years or so of our existence, our focus was on SMEs and infrastructure development. In the next 20 to 25 years, until very recently, we focused on our then so-called 4 mandated sectors: infrastructure, maritime, oil and gas, and technology. I joined the bank in 2019, and not long after I joined the bank, I visited a key stakeholder of the bank. And during that conversation, the stakeholder posed a question to me: is Bank Pembangunan Malaysia still relevant? And that was quite a shock. I had gone over to sort of, engage a very important stakeholder, and this was the question I got: is the Development Bank of Malaysia still relevant? And she went on to talk about how we were competing in the same space as commercial banks. And the question was, if the Development Bank of Malaysia, BPMB, was competing in the same space for the same deals as commercial banks, perhaps we should shut down this bank and let the commercial banks focus on these transactions. And that was a real wake-up call for us. And it was a timely wake-up call. And we took that comment very seriously. I went back to the bank, and together with my colleagues, we sat down and examined the way we were operating. And I couldn't deny that we were doing exactly what this particular stakeholder had mentioned. And I didn't want the bank to be shut down. I would be out of a job. So we better do something about it. And we, as I said, took stock of the situation. And we decided to start paying attention to impact financing. Now, impact financing is not new, but it was new to Bank Pembangunan at that point in time, because we were not used to focusing on the impact that our financing would have on the population, on society, on the economy. And it's one thing to talk about wanting to focus on impact financing, but we need to have an objective way of going about assessing the impact of our financing on society, the population, and the economy. And we also had to make some key changes to our mindset. As a bank, we, of course, focused a lot on how much money we would make from each deal. And what was the mindset change that we had to go through? We had to focus on the impact our financing will have on the economy, the society, and the population. It's a very simple statement, but when we look at it from that perspective, the way we assess credit changes significantly. I have colleagues here who actually look at this on a daily basis. So when we evaluate credit, we don't look only at the financial aspects of the proposal. We also look at the impact the project will have on the society. And then there was another change in mindset that we had to go through. Banks are all about risk mitigation. Of course, if at all possible, banks would like to eliminate risk, but that's not possible. So banks focus on risk mitigation. Now, how did we change our mindset in this regard? So it's not just about risk mitigation, but it's also about success maximization. Again, you might say it's just a phrase, but again, I will assure you that when we go through the credit evaluation process with these new mindsets, the conversation changes. So if I could summarize before I hand over the mic, these changes resulted in Bank Pembangunan Malaysia Berhad developing a framework that we now use to evaluate and assess every project we propose to finance. And this framework helps us to score the projects from several perspectives, basically from the perspective of financial efficiency and also from the perspective of social, environmental, and economic impact. I'll talk more about this assessment later, but I hope that gives you a fair understanding of the journey that we have gone through in terms of paying attention to what is important when evaluating projects that we are asked to finance. Thank you, Lavan.
Thank you so much, Arshad. That's really fascinating to hear. And thank you for the call out for the International Women's Day. In fact, as you write, very, quoting that very eloquent quote from Justice Nalini, it comes to mind that also climate change will disproportionately affect women. So that gender element is also there in addressing climate change. Next, let me call upon Datuk Akitek Ezumi Harzani Ismail, who is the president of Pertubuhan Akitek Malaysia. And perhaps you can tell us about the sustainability journey undertaken by the built environment sector.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Ms. Lavanya. Okay, I am from Pertubuhan Akitek Malaysia, or Malaysian Institute of Architects, also known as PAM in short. So what I want to share that our journey through PAM as the Professional Institute for Architects in Malaysia. So I remember that in 1992, after the Rio summit, people were talking, the summit was discussing about the global warming and how to make the planet cooler. So subsequently after that, a few of other bigger nations start to come up with their strategy plan and how to encourage more people to build more sustainable environment. So of course, my angle is more on built environment as our profession very much involved in the construction industry. So as early as 1990s and in the UK, I think UK started to have these rating tools for the development. So for any development, so they use BREEAM as a tool to give rating to any buildings that was built in UK. And then after that, followed by LEED, introduced by USA in 1996. And then of course, CASB by Japan in 2001. Australia started the Green Star rating 2003, and our neighbor down south, Singapore, started the Green Mark in 2005. So at that time, when the developer came to architect to design building, they said that I want you to design to certain green standard. Either it's LEED or it's Green Mark from Singapore. And then the developer say that we don't have any rating agency or rating tools for Malaysia. So at that time, Malaysian Institute of Architects was thinking that why not we start with the green rating tools to rate the building. That will encourage more developer to start a more sustainable development. So we try to engage with the government and a few other professional institutes as well, including the town planners, the Malaysian Institute of Town Planners, even the Association of Consulting Engineers at that time, and a few of us. This is the industry-led initiative, although we tried to engage the government at that time, but at the end, only the two hardcores, I would say that Malaysian Institute of Architects, PEM, and also the engineers, Association of Consulting Engineers, say that why not? We just fork out few cash, we start something for the benefit of the country and also the world. So with the little seed fund that we collect among ourselves, so PEM contributed 60,000 and ACM 40,000, so that was 100,000 for the start. So we have started to develop the rating tools which is suitable for all the development for our country, which is now, the tool is known as Green Building Index, or GBI in short. So it is a joint venture, the joint effort between the architects and engineers who actually very much involved in construction, understand buildings, understand how building work and how to maintain the buildings. So these are the professional, the contribution from our profession, a little, I would say that contribution that how we hope that we help to make the planet better place to stay. So talking about GBI, it was launched on 21st May 2009. So after 10 years, in 2019, we have made some assessment to the data that we have. So by 2019, we have certified the green building in Malaysia for about 230 million square feet. It was a great success. So after 10 years, we can have more than 800 projects submitted, and we have certified most of the projects that submitted for the green rating, from platinum, gold, silver, and even the certification. So there's 6 items, 6 elements actually that we evaluate for every application for the rating, including in terms of energy efficiency, indoor environment quality, material and resources used for the development of the building, not just the building after the completion, but even the source of materials, manufacturing of the material, whether it follows certain sustainable method or not. And then in terms of the water efficiency, planning and management, and the last one is innovation. So what kind of innovative ideas that you implement in your scheme, in the development, and how the building react to the environment. So that will be also considered as part of the element in rating the building. So, talking about all this, so what are the actual contribution to the world? So what I want to share here today is the statistic or data. Okay, I don't want to go through very detailed the process of implementation and how the rating program. So what I want to share with you, okay, as of today, we have already certified 250 million gross floor area of the building in Malaysia. And based on the data on last year data, that we actually have certified the equivalent to 56 twin towers, Petronas twin towers, in terms of area, which is about 230 million square feet. At the same time, the benefit is that that actually is equivalent to the reduction of carbon footprint, which is equivalent to removing away 230,000 number of cars from the road. So the total carbon that we have reduced, okay, now is equivalent to 1.2 million tons a year in terms of carbon dioxide reduction. This is as simple as we now eliminate 230,000 cars from the road. That is the impact. Whenever we mention the number, it's very difficult for the general public to understand, but when we say that, okay, we have managed to remove 230,000 cars from the road, it means that reduction of 21% of cars in Selangor. So that will reduce the number of jam. So in terms of data and statistics. And that similar reduction of carbon footprint also give the meanings of like we are greening 5,457 square kilometer of forest, which is equivalent to 22 times of Kuala Lumpur. Imagine if you are planting trees, 22 times the size of Kuala Lumpur, which is 23 square kilometers. So we have what, 5,457 square kilometers planted with all trees. So that is the impact. How do we manage to get all this impact? You have to remember that the culprit in energy consumption is not your car, is not your vehicle, but it is the building. Based on this data study in the United States, 76% of electricity consumption actually used by the building, not by the cars, and 40% of the greenhouse gases actually emission related to the building. So that's why it's very, very important to look into how to make building more efficient, more sustainable, and more green. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ezumi. And really, congratulations. I think this is a good success story, industry-driven criteria. And thanks for telling us the impact in such a very visual, vivid manner. Thank you. And next, gives me great pleasure to call upon Ms. Kasturi Nathan, who is a partner, head of governance and sustainability, and executive director at KPMG in Malaysia. Kasturi, maybe you can talk to us about the impact of climate change on businesses and developing climate-related action plans and targets. What you know about. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Lavanya. A big thank you to KSI for this invitation, and a very good afternoon to all present. I'm going to jump straight into the core of the discussion, which I'm going to be speaking on ESG, particularly honing into ESG risks, reporting requirements, and how businesses are increasingly impacted. All right, so the consideration, ladies and gentlemen, of ESG factors have become critical to the success of businesses across all sectors. In an era where impacts of a global pandemic, right, climate change, and growing inequality are intensifying, intangible value and the need for data-driven information is grown in importance. Right, so the first step we need to take, businesses will need to consider, is to embed ESG into businesses, must be taken by the board. Right, so the board of directors must clearly take responsibility and accountability to drive this transition towards responsible businesses. The World Economic Forum between 2021 reported that the leading threats to businesses today are extreme weather events, right, natural disasters, and the failure to mitigate and adapt to climate change. So clearly, these are the directions that we are facing in 2021 and will be increasingly facing in years to come until and unless collectively there are broad efforts taken to mitigate and correct these actions or these risks. Right. Southeast Asia, ladies and gentlemen, in particular, has been identified to be one of the most vulnerable regions in the world to climate change. As a consequence, businesses and society in this part of the world are facing unprecedented climate risks. New analysis suggests that the impacts of climate change in Southeast Asia may be larger than previously estimated, possibly reaching close to about 11% of GDP by 2100. Right, so stakeholders are pushing for increased transparency. Capital markets demand evidence-based, market-informed, and transparent data in order to deliver long-term value to stakeholders and shareholders. Reporting is clearly an important means to this end. Climate is going to be the center of all policies. Ladies and gentlemen, in the banking and capital market sector, TCFD, which is Climate Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, will drive consistent and reliable data sets, and voluntary standards may move to become mandatory in jurisdictions. The International Integrated Reporting Council, IIRC, and the SASB, the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, have announced intention to merge late last year into a reporting foundation. The merger will, in fact, will advance the work of the other reporting frameworks, as some of you may already be in use of, such as CDP, the Climate Disclosure Programs, the CDSBs, the GRIs, the Global Reporting Initiatives, the IRRC and the SASBs. These are all going to merge collectively, and I think works are in place to develop a comprehensive corporate reporting framework to drive sustainability performances. COVID-19, ladies and gentlemen, has highlighted the importance of resilience to extreme change and the ability for businesses to undertake radical transformation. It provides an opportunity to embed ESG into future board-level decisions. Countries have the opportunity to use economic stimulus to invest in green economies, reducing the emissions that caused damaging climate change risks. The key objectives would be to restore economic activity without simply restoring old patterns of environmental degradation. According to the 2020 SDG Index and dashboards, Malaysia ranked 60th across 166 countries, right? Third amongst across the ASEAN, right after Thailand and Vietnam. So businesses clearly on this course should begin to address its operations and supply chain risks and opportunities towards cost optimization and innovative growth. Right. Some of the first few, if I can just take it down into a couple of steps, that easy steps for businesses to apply. Firstly, companies must clearly engage to set strategies addressing sustainability considerations against material risk exposures and ensure governance structures are clearly established. That's one first priority. Secondly, they should determine business models, identify activities and supply chain from point of origin to point of sale. So there must be clarity across the supply chain, business activities, and that to the model. Right. Thirdly, businesses must measure, monitor risks, and evaluate to engage with your internal and external stakeholders. And finally, clearly, businesses will need to strengthen stakeholder relationships, social impacts through capacity building and stakeholder engagement. A case in point I have here is Nike. Right, this happened in the early 1990s. Some of you may be familiar with this case, and it's Nike and its supply chain management. In the 1990s, sportswear Nike was accused of systematic abusive labor practices amongst contractors in Indonesia. The company's reputation took a hit, and it became a target for widespread negative press coverage and protests. Not only did the company experience reputation loss, it also encountered real financial losses and falling stock prices. So what did Nike do? Nike engaged with various organizations, allowed labor and human rights representatives to join factory inspections in Asia. It also donated 7.7 million to create a global alliance for workers and communities, which undertook research and engagement with 4,000 workers in the Nike factories in Indonesia, all right, to understand the attitudes and aspirations. And this collectively, ladies and gentlemen, attributed to its effective stakeholder engagement, targeted action, and transparency. The company is now recognized as one of the world's most reputable. Stock prices grew 6 times higher than what it was in the 1990s. So clearly, the benefits are real. The benefits are right straight down to the bottom line, and actions, and you've got businesses have no time to lose, in fact, rather than optimize and build efficiency around effective business models. So climate risk, ladies and gentlemen, is a global threat which has no vaccine. All corporations and businesses can play a role regardless of industries and sizes. But the question now is, where should you start and how fast should you go, right? So as a final point, KPMG, of course, in support of our sustainable way and our climate solutions with our member firms, clients, and communities, we have our target for net zero carbon and organize as a net zero carbon organization by 2030. And with that, I hope I've addressed the points that you requested me to raise, Lavanya. Over to you then.
Thank you so much, Kasturi, and congratulations to you too, to KPMG, for your target as well. And thanks also for giving us that good example of Nike and how they have actually benefited from taking the right action. That's encouraging to hear. And now, last but not least, I think nicely segue to Mr. Redha Shukor, who is a partner in PwC Malaysia. So Redha, maybe if you could touch on environmental risks and impacts on business, and also a bit on sustainable supply chains and how that matters. And I think you would also be touching on hopefully available tools that companies can use to measure their impact. Thank you.
Assalamualaikum and a very good afternoon, everyone. First and foremost, to KSI and the members and the organizing committee of the Malaysian Sustainability Summit, Leadership Summit. Thank you so much for the invitation. I think first I'd like to recognize and acknowledge that a lot of the things that we'll be discussing, what I'll be sharing today, resonates very strongly with some of the panel members' viewpoints and comments as well. And on the topic of environmental risk, I think one of the things that we've observed with regards to environmental risk and how important it is actually through one of the studies that was commissioned by WEF. I think Kasturi mentioned it earlier, where when it comes to the survey done by WEF, when you look at the members, they have indicated that the top 5 critical issues or risks in their organization, the top 5 are all environmental related risks, right? In fact, if you look back 5 years prior to that, the environmental risk has consistently been an area that the members organizations have highlighted as severe and requires urgent attention. Now, the reason for that is very clear. I think within our region itself, we have seen detrimental effects on how the environment can really impact business. Now, in Thailand, not too long ago, you've seen massive floods that really disrupted the supply chain as well as production of their heavy industries. We look at other industries as well, in terms of some of the wealth funds in Norway who have exited some of their portfolio investments because of the industries that, within certain industries such as forestry, because of the risk from deforestation. And in terms of one of the largest fund managers, BlackRock, it's very well publicized on how they have exited the thermal coal business because of concerns from a climate perspective. So these are all really happening in our world today. The impact is very clear. Businesses, investors are prioritizing their concerns. Now, we've also came across an interesting study commissioned by the Climate Central, and this is more focused to the Malaysian landscape. Now, they did a projection in terms of what would happen in terms of the changing temperature, and rising water sea levels. And it is projected, unfortunately, that there will be a coastal area flood in 2050 west of Subanjaya all the way up to Port Klang. Now, essentially, it indicates that these areas have a high risk of being flooded severely. Now, what does that mean to the business? Think about the residential areas, think about the industrial areas, as well as all agriculture-related businesses in that area. Port Klang being a major hub for us in the Klang Valley, what does that mean to the rest of the areas east of the Klang Valley, east of Subanjaya, right? So this has severe implications. Not only that, there's also an implication from the health perspective. Typically, when you do incur massive severe floods, cases like malaria will typically go up. You know, can our healthcare system cope? As it is, we're already struggling with a pandemic. And should this situation come a reality, that is certainly a cause for concern. Now, I mentioned earlier about the case in Thailand where the supply chain was disrupted within the industry because of the floods. Now, this had severe operational as well as financial ramification. Overall, it cost them about $15 billion US, and close to 14,500 companies were impacted by these floods alone. So you can imagine the impact to the entire economy of Thailand during that time for something that, you know, is very difficult to manage. So when it comes to the supply chain risk, I think this is an area that is constantly being explored on how supply chains can further be improved through better ESG practices. Now, as you can imagine, the supply chain goes end to end from the raw materials, processing, right up to the customer and also disposal. Now, across the value chain, there are various opportunities for not just consumers, but manufacturers and producers alike to contribute towards a more sustainable supply chain. When it comes to the raw materials, there are always options to look at alternative materials. I think Kasturi brought up Nike is a very good example where they explored better material or more sustainable materials to be produced to create a different market altogether. Now, improving the conditions of the factory as well. Now, that is a critical element within the supply chain. I think, unfortunately, there's news within our Malaysian market. Certain industries were impacted and severely punished in terms of, allegations of labor rights issues when it comes to manufacturing practices. Innovation, looking at how products can be innovated through sustainable means in order to create more value for the consumers. And of course, the easiest one of all is looking at efficiently improving the processes to reduce energy, reduce waste, and overall reduce the product cost as well. Now, PwC conducted, and we conduct an annual, what we call the SDG challenge to really understand how different countries, different industries are faring when it comes to adopting the SDGs. Now, this is a global study commissioned with over 1,700 countries, and Malaysia is also 1,700 companies, not countries, and companies in Malaysia also participated. We got about 70, close to 80 companies participated. Now, what we are seeing is a really promising trend, a trend that indicates that environmental risk is constantly being prioritized. An example, SDG 8, as you will know, has seen an increase in importance that's been identified by some of these businesses in Malaysia, rising by about 7% compared to the year prior. Climate action, SDG 13, has risen by 4%. So we are seeing more awareness. We're seeing a lot more adoption and emphasis by corporate companies in Malaysia to be more aligned with the SDGs, and that's very encouraging indeed. Now, I think just now, Arshad mentioned about the importance of measurement, and Kasturi also mentioned about the importance of reporting and disclosures. Now, what I would like to share is, this is quite difficult for an organization to actually venture into the world of disclosure or reporting areas that they're not familiar with, especially when there's so many frameworks out there, right? Now, PwC, we established a tool called the Total Impact Measurement and Management, or TIM for short. that helps to quantify the impact of ESG towards a company. And there was a project in Malaysia, some of you may be familiar, that an R&D project that we've conducted with Kazana called Project Kronos, that essentially helps to quantify the intrinsic value of an organization beyond the tangible assets, right? Beyond the financial or also physical assets. So as we move along, there are more innovative ways to measure and quantify some of this. And tools like this will be necessary to really help organizations to really understand what is the value that is being created through sustainability and ESG practices. I think before I end, what I would like to share is, as with some of my colleagues on stage, PwC as well, we are venturing into our net zero target, and it is a challenging feat, challenging task, and more than happy to share some of our war stories. But I would like to end this session by just highlighting that managing climate risk and environmental risk is a collective effort that we all need to play a part of. It's not just the businesses, it's the SMEs, regulators, and this will contribute towards even one of the SDG goals, which is SDG 17, partnerships. I think many organizations that we've certainly engaged find ESG practices a daunting and overwhelming task, but we are all in this together. We're all here to move towards a better world, better Malaysia, and certainly partnership is one way to do it, to share the load. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Redha. And really, congratulations too. It's so nice to say congratulations to so many of you on this panel today on the net zero target. And thanks also for taking us through that whole supply chain narrative and touching on intrinsic value assessment. And maybe we can talk more about that during the discussion after this. So ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of the first round of comments, interventions by our esteemed panel. Just to very quickly summarize, Arina, she mentioned to us about the study that EY has done on Climate Barometer, talked about the investment appetite and the need for risk disclosure, climate risk disclosure, and also talked about some of the things that companies are already undertaking in Malaysia, scenario analysis, internal carbon pricing, which is really interesting to hear, plantations and what they are doing, and also the whole net zero target setting by companies. And then we heard a very fascinating account from Arshad, who described their journey towards impact financing and why they are doing that. So we will hopefully hear more about the framework that he mentioned during the session after this. And thereafter, we heard Datuk Ezumi on the GBI and all the actual positive impact that building sustainably has brought about, and shared with us some very fascinating data on how that has improved our environment actually. And then Kasturi talked to us about the need for comprehensive reporting framework, given the scary fact that 11% of GDP could be lost by 2100 in this part of the world. And she also talked to us about, what are the things that companies need to do towards getting to this, towards sustainability, basically. And we just heard from Redha, so I won't repeat myself, but thank you. You then talked to us about tools and again, intrinsic value, which we'll be really keen to hear about. Now, I have a lot of questions, but I know you two would probably have a lot of questions. So let me, open up the floor to all of you first to see whether you want to ask questions, to our panel here. Are there any questions that we would like to raise from the floor? No? Lunch was too good, I think. Okay, if not, then it gives me the pleasure to start the questions rolling. Perhaps, Arshad, maybe I can start with you. The bank obviously is a profit-making entity, right? And you have talked about impact financing. So how do you implement that? How do you implement impact financing, and how has that actually affected what you see in the bottom line?
Thank you for the question. And this goes back to the point you made. Measurement is important. It's very easy to speak about these issues at a very high level, but if we don't start measuring, then they remain just bad statements. So in this regard, we also had to make a very important decision with regard to how we were going to measure our initiatives from the perspective of impact financing. What did we do? We brought in the World Bank. As I said earlier, impact financing is not new, but it's new to us. So we brought in the World Bank to advise us, and we had discussions with Bank Negara Malaysia as well. Bank Negara Malaysia is still in the process of developing the policy document on matters related to these initiatives, but we told Bank Negara that we will push ahead with our initiative, and hopefully by the time Bank Negara comes out with its policy document, we will be in line with the basic principles of the policy document. So the World Bank team spent about 6 months with our team here in KL. And one of the first questions the World Bank team asked me was, which of the 17 SDGs would you want to measure your financing projects against? And I was very clear in my mind what the answer was going to be. I don't know. Because it was a question I wasn't prepared for. You have 17 SDGs. So how do you decide which of the 17 would be most relevant to our portfolio? So we agreed that we would map our portfolio, our then portfolio, against all 17 SDGs to figure out which of the 17 SDGs were most relevant to our portfolio. And after that assessment was completed, we discovered that 5 of the 17 SDGs were most relevant to the accounts in our portfolio. And these SDGs were 7, 8, 9, 10, and 13. So we agreed that we will start by anchoring our impact assessment framework to these 5 SDGs. Why not more than 5? Well, we have to start somewhere, and we did agree with the World Bank that in the near future, as the assessment methodology matures, we could and we probably will add on more SDGs. So mentioning the 5 SDGs is just the starting point. In summary, our assessment framework has 32 indicators. And if I could just give you some technical perspective on how this assessment framework was constructed. 12 of the 32 indicators in our framework are from the 5 SDGs. And then we have 5 indicators from the Bank Negara Malaysia inclusivity indicators, 6 indicators that relate to safeguards, 3 other indicators, and finally 6 indicators that relate to financial efficiency. So in total, 32 indicators. And we assess each project using this framework, and the framework will churn out a score. Now, the next question we had to ask ourselves was this: if a particular project we run through this framework does not get a very good score, do we reject the project? And we spent a few days discussing this single question, because it was a very important and somewhat philosophical question that we had to address. And we finally decided that we decided that we would not reject projects that did not meet a minimum score. However, the score will enable us to impose conditions on the customer, to impose conditions on the project, so that over time, if we were to run the project through the assessment framework again 3 or 4 years down the road, the score would be a much better score. But we were not prepared to make a go or no-go decision based on the score alone, because we could end up in a situation whereby perhaps 8 out of 10 projects would fail the test, and we won't have projects to fund. So we piloted this assessment framework in 2020, and we have had about 1 year of experience. And now every time the originators come to the credit committee with a proposal paper, they have to attach the impact assessment framework report. And I'll give you a very recent example. It was only 2 years ago, sorry, my apologies. It was only 2 days ago that we had to deal with a credit proposal in relation to the development of low-cost housing in the east coast of Malaysia. So from a financial perspective, the project didn't score very high. However, from a social, environment, economic perspective, it got a very high score. And during the discussions at the credit committee, we deliberated on this matter and we approved the financing application to a large extent due to the high score that the project secured from a social, environment and economic perspective. That's not to say that from a financial perspective, it was a bad project. It wasn't a top tier project from a financial perspective, but because it scored high from a social environment perspective, we were comfortable making the decision to grant the financing in the context of what that project would bring to that part of Peninsular Malaysia. And there are many more examples I can share with you. But this is basically the responsibility banks have when it comes to influencing behavior. Banks are, I mean, you know this, banks are very powerful organizations when it comes to determining how society behaves, how society evolves. And if we don't take on the responsibility of helping society change its ways, then it would be a huge failure. Of course, many banks have taken many initiatives, and these are initiatives that we have taken at Bank Pembangunan. And I was speaking with Lavanya earlier during lunch. My hope is that in 5 or maybe 10 years' time, we will be able to say no to projects that don't meet the minimum score. But until then, we have to work with our customers, we have to work with our stakeholders to help society mature to that level. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Arshad. Yes, that stepwise approach is probably what will help all of us, move together. As Kasturi mentioned, also the ESG element might be something which he said, you're seeing that companies do perform better on all counts, including financially as well, and hope the bank will also see that as the case moving forward. Congratulations. Anthony, you want to ask a question?
Hi, my name is Anthony Tan. I'm from the APPGM-SDG. I so happened I was in Bangkok just before the flood hit in 2010. And that massive flood was due to the badly maintained dam towards the north of Bangkok. And that losses, the heavy losses that were incurred by the industries was because 4 to 6 of the industrial estates were built in what used to be a swamp. It doesn't take a genius to think or understand that when heavy rains come, the first place that gets hit would be the swamp. So my general question would have been, who in their right mind would have actually approved such a project to build industrial estates on swamp? So My question is, how do we get the regulators, government regulators, to take into consideration climate change impacts in the process of approving development projects? Now, the bank deciding to approve or not approve is one stage. But before it goes to the bank, before it gets approved by the government regulators, something needs to be done, right? So I'll give you another example. In Malacca Central, the bus depot is built on a former swamp. In 2007, when it was flooded with 1 meter of water, the chief minister asked, why is this place flooded? So it actually brings to mind the thinking process. Thank you.
I'm not sure if anyone here wants to take that question on what government can do. Yeah?
Okay, maybe I try to respond to that question. Okay, building on swamp area is not wrong. The reason why I say this, if you remember, okay, Netherlands was built below the sea level. Okay, so that's the key point. So I think what we have to understand is that the mitigation and what are the plans if the worst case scenario happen. So we must plan, we must have plan to make sure that the plan works. Okay, a lot of reclaimed area, even if you look at some of the Singapore is another example, how they reclaim the water body and to make develop to make way for development as well. But it has to be properly planned and consider the infrastructure to take any possibility of disaster. Even on top of hill, I just give you an example in 2014, 2015. In Kuala Krai is not a valley area, it's hill area. But it was hit by the flood of 7 meter high, 7 meter deep. So up to the second floor, the roof of the second floor. So it's not the matter of location, whether it's swamp or valley or top of the hill. But the infrastructure that was developed to support that development, that is very important. I think 2017, there was incident in the IOI area, Puchong area, where actually it was a flash flood happened. And many people made statement that we should not develop anymore in that particular area. Okay, the area cannot take any more development, and then we have to do somewhere else, open a new area. I think opening a new area is very bad decision. You are utilizing more greenfield, but what you should do actually to improve the infrastructure to take care of whatever possibilities. So if we understand that the demand for the infrastructure is there, you should not just put the building there, but support it with a better infrastructure. If you need a better water management system, the drainage system, and then do it first before you do another building. So the key issue that we have to understand here, we don't really have the infrastructure master plan in this country, except Putrajaya. It's a credit for Putrajaya. Putrajaya, they have a common utility trenching, or the infrastructure, everything was well planned, but not in other cities, especially the old city, even in Kuala Lumpur. There is no infrastructure master plan. Development was allowed, was approved to be developed on piecemeal basis. If I am a developer, I submit a plan to develop a 40-story building here, people will look at that development, okay, this is possible to be approved, then it will be approved. And the neighbor submit another proposal, another 30-story building or 50-story building. So people will look at that development, yes, it is possible to be approved. But at the end, nobody really look at the whole infrastructure area of the development. So that you cannot look at the township as one plot, one building, but you have to look at overall. So this is where actually the infrastructure is very important. The current practice is that if I want to develop one piece of land, I have to build the drain in my area, connect to my neighbor's block, which is later on to be taken care by my neighbor. But why not we have the proper infrastructure master plan where all the drainage network is there, the power supply network is there, the water supply network is already there. Whenever you want to develop a certain area, just tap to that. When we mention this, and then people say that is not possible for the old city. That's not true. Even if you look at Taiwan, Taipei and Kaohsiung. Taipei, they have new city, old city. They manage to restore the infrastructure. At the beginning of the development of Taipei, it's also very organic, okay, piecemeal development, but now they have reinstated with the new common utility trenching with a proper infrastructure planning, so that any new development can tap to the infrastructure network that has been built. Okay, it will always come back to who is going to finance for that. It's going to cost you billions. So what from my study with the Taipei government, so what they have done actually, whenever you have the infrastructure network, there are people who will get the benefit from there. In their case, the power utility company, the water company, the telecommunication company. So these giant companies will contribute the upfront. Whoever come later pay to them with the profit as well. So if you look into that, that is possible.
Thank you, Datuk. I think that whole idea of whether it's an investment or a cost and who's going to pay for it is very fascinating. Thank you. Do we have time for one more question or two? Time, okay. All right. I'm sorry, I had a lot of questions to ask the rest of you as well, but we can carry on the conversation. Thank you so much. Thank you very much for your sharing and for giving us new ideas, for telling us and showing us that actually there are options. There is a way forward. Things don't have to go on business as usual. There are alternatives, and we should really embrace alternatives and embrace change and really build together a better world that is climate resilient, pandemic resilient, and everything resilient. Thank you.